I started this drawing with the intention of depicting a really pivotal scene in the fantasy novel I'm writing called Cult of the Icon. My main objective with this drawing itself was to depict this scene in my story within its own imagined world, being one that is apart from our own, of course. And I really wanted to flesh out the unique characteristics that kind of made this world its own. With this drawing, I really wanted to showcase really in-depth detail, the sort of chaos and intensity that are occurring within this scene. And I really wanted to utilize all this to kind of push my craft a step further and to really improve my technical skills. So with that in mind, it obviously came with quite a few challenges, but I was pretty eager to tackle them. These challenges kind of forced me out of my comfort zone, of course, but it pushed me to find kind of my own creative solutions for some of the problems. And it also pushed me to lean into influences that I wasn't really anticipating in leaning into when I first set out to make this illustration. So some of my influences for my art in general, and especially for this piece, are Southern Baroque painters from Spain and Italy, like Caravaggio, Francisco de Zurbarán, El Greco. Also kind of more low fantasy, kind of dark fantasy, like movies like The Dark Crystal or the movie and stories of Conan the Barbarian. Also video games like Morrowind. All these things kind of together kind of help me shape the kind of look and the feel that I want to achieve. So one big challenge for me that I had with this piece, of course, was the lighting. Not so much the lighting itself, but more how kind of each object or each part of the body interacted with the light source I'd established. And this actually led me to changing the light source that I'd established kind of near the end of the drawing. I had it set up to where it's shining down from behind the characters, and kind of just realized, like if I kept going with that, all the facial features would be in the shadow, everything in the front of the characters would be dark and kind of lose the detail and emphasis that I wanted to strive for. So I ended up changing the light source to shine down kind of in front and off to the side of the characters, making it a lot easier to emphasize the kind of focal points that I wanted to showcase in this piece. So the situation with the lighting challenged me in a number of ways, and it led me to conducting a number of studies just with graphite pencil and paper, just really focusing on the value. What I did, I ended up using one of my favorite video games, Elden Ring, and I got my character as I was exploring the beautiful lands between. I would pull up to a spot that looked really cool, had a really good lighting situation, throw on a certain outfit on my character, maybe some robes that would help me really depict the folds in the clothing that would help me with this piece. I spent a good 2-3 hours drawing just a couple different scenarios, a couple different positions of my character with different articles of clothing, different backgrounds, different settings. And these studies really helped me understand better kind of like not only how the lighting reacts with different articles of clothing, but also how the different angles of the limbs or the head or all that kind of interacts with the light source. And also really importantly was how the folds in the clothing kind of were naturally laid. So one thing that I really like about pieces from Caravaggio or Zurbarán is that the way that they depict the folds of the clothing, whether it's like the robes or the shirts, blouses that the subjects have, the way they depict it, it just makes you feel like you're part of the world that they're painting. The little things of that in that kind of way kind of really bring their paintings to life. And that's one takeaway that I really want to implement into my own pieces. So these studies really helped me with that tremendously. So despite these studies, I still found it quite challenging to draw each article of clothing, each, position, limb, each face. I found it hard to depict all those with the light source I had, even after I changed it, because unlike the studies where I was working off of, a screenshot or a still image, that I could take all my time, getting it every bit of value exactly correct according to the photo. With this final illustration, I was working purely through my imagination, through, inventing essentially. So that was quite a challenge for me to kind of get that same level of detail from my studies as in the final piece, which I did not achieve. But I think that is just something that will come more with experience, time, and more importantly, repetition. The final challenge I had was including the amount of black that I originally sought out to include into this drawing. If you look at paintings from Caravaggio or Zurbarán, it's pretty clear that they favor a lot of darkness in their pieces, especially Caravaggio, super famous for that. I mean, he popularized tenebrism all across Europe. And I really wanted to emulate that feeling into this piece, because for my past drawings for Cult of the Icon, most of them were set at nighttime, so that was a really good excuse for me to include a lot of black and a lot of dark color into them. But with this piece, it was set during the afternoon or early evening, so I couldn't just make the whole background black and call it a day. I really had to play with each color and each lighting situation, each value of, the layers going from the foreground to the background. And that kind of pushed this drawing in a different direction that I had intended originally. But it led me to embracing a couple happy accidents, actually, because since black wasn't, taking over the entire piece, I kind of noticed that a lot of the colors that I had laid down already were really popping in terms of vibrancy and saturation. So I started to really lean into that, bring, the colors of the skin, the clothing, even the setting itself. I'm pretty satisfied with the colors of the piece, even though, it's not heavily black, it's not super dramatic, high contrast lighting. Related happy accident. I take a lot of inspiration also from another Greek and Spanish painter, El Greco. He came a bit after Zurbarán. He included a lot of black in his pieces as well, but just in a different way than other previous Baroque painters, because a lot of his pieces, they're also set during the daytime outdoors, so it was clear that the sun was still out in his pieces. He still managed to have these super heavy, thick black shadows in, the folds of the clothing, the folds of the skin. And as I was creating this piece, as time went on, as I was finding myself not able to bring up as much black as I would like to, and I kind of leaned into that as well with the, the folds of the arm, the way the skin sags, that kind of way. So I really love learning and I crave improvement. For each piece, I really try to step it up in terms of my technical skill in a way that's noticeable to myself. And for the past few months, I've really been taking illustration seriously. Because for the past couple years, I've been pretty much only creating just really heavily stylized 2D illustrations with, simplified color palettes, I guess cartoonish sort of proportions, which was really fun. I really enjoyed doing it. But I just felt that, frankly, I was holding myself back in terms of skill, and I felt it was just time to grow up as an artist and to really take the next step. Because I felt that at this point, I really did have the capability to. It was just, I really had to apply myself in learning and practicing. I really felt it was time to improve my technical skills so I could effectively depict the ideas that I have in my head onto paper or canvas. With this all in mind, one thing that I strive to improve upon for my next piece is definitely anatomy. I have a bachelor's degree in graphic design, so I took a couple introductory basic art classes. We learned things like perspective and basic shading, but that was about it. So I never really truly learned anatomy the way I see painter peers or my illustrator peers, the way they learned it. And that's one thing that I know it will improve my craft, and it will help me more effectively depict the characters and the scenes and the ideas that I have in my head. Just knowing how, each muscle group is formed and how it lays on each bone structural group, and all that is really useful, even if it's not humans like my characters aren't, if you just want to draw beings of any sort. just knowing how muscles and bones all come together, all form together, the ways they move, how they react to lighting, that is incredibly important knowledge. And I strive to learn at least a little bit by the time I, create my next piece to where it's a noticeable difference and a big step up. I also want to try experimenting with different levels of color saturation. Where this piece is very, it's very vibrant throughout, kind of the same level of saturation. And I like that. I like it for what it is. My previous pieces might be a bit less saturated, but I want to try creating a piece where I use saturation and vibrancy as a tool for focus, if that makes sense. Kind of having the different focal points emphasize not only through value or negative space, but also through saturation. Whether it's focal point having really saturated bright color against like a more desaturated background, not leaning so heavily just on making things light or dark to create contrast, but also leaning into different levels of saturation and then combining it all together to create more realistic piece that really feels like you could step into, because that ultimately is my end goal. Another thing I'd like to improve upon is not being afraid to really just establish a powerful central composition. Because for the past few years for my illustrations, I developed this knee-jerk reaction to where, every time I was trying to come up with a composition for a piece, I felt like for some reason I had to stay away from just straight up and down or a powerful central focus. I felt like I had to create these intricate, interweaving, busy, movement-filled compositions, and it was cool. I ended up creating some fun pieces that I enjoy, but I want to branch out. I want to not be afraid to draw a certain way to evoke a certain feeling, because if you want to evoke a certain feeling with your piece, you're going to have to use certain techniques. Another thing is I really avoided the color red for whatever reason. I felt I had to use, only tertiary colors, or I didn't want to just use a straight up red, a straight up blue, but I kind of want to get away from that mindset as well. Because red, it evokes a certain emotion, a certain feeling when you see it. And if the piece calls for it like this one did, then you have to lean into what makes the piece the best. And that's another kind of thing I'm learning. And like I was saying with the composition, I really want to try creating more pieces where it just features like a more powerful, centrally focused subject. Kind of like in the way that Frank Frazetta's artworks are. He really wasn't afraid to create just one central figure shown in a way at a certain perspective that just exuded confidence and power. And I want to try leaning more into that kind of lane. So overall, this piece really taught me a lot. Forced me to go out of my way in a number of ways and accept new ideas, accept new influences, accept new directions that I just frankly would not have otherwise before starting this piece. And I honestly truly believe that this is what creating art is about. Really embracing your happy accidents, kind of exploring avenues that you wouldn't have otherwise, or just letting the piece take you where it needs to go. Because sometimes you try to force an idea, force a piece into a certain direction, but as you're getting through, maybe that's not the right way. Maybe it has its own sort of direction that it will end up being more effective, and kind of just have to embrace that. I also believe we should always strive to improve our craft and whatever skills you have or whatever ventures you're pursuing, and that we really should not allow fear or complacency to stagnate our passion.